What is God like? God is like a bridegroom, one who is full of excitement for the joyous day coming, one who is completely in love and besotted with his future wife, and one who brings the party wherever he goes. So what is knowing God like? Knowing God is like being at a great feast. Ancient Jewish weddings took 7 days. That is a serious party. There was food, there was wine, there was feasting. I'm going to talk to you about a story where Jesus goes to a wedding, but just before that I'm going to talk to you about someone I know who went to a wedding. One of my wife's relatives has this habit of being early everywhere, and one time she turned up very early to a wedding. And she got in there, and curiously the music was already going, the service was already going, it was halfway through or near the end or something, and she started to be very confused and she didn't recognise anyone. But eventually she realised she turned up so early she was at the wrong wedding. So it puts in the question, wait, whose wedding is this? Who's the bride and groom? Just hold that question in your head, because that's going to come into play in this story about Jesus. A question of, hang on, whose wedding is this that Jesus is going to? What role is he playing in this wedding? Why does he do what he does here? So we read this in John 2, famous story about Jesus at the wedding at CANA, from the beginning of John 2. On the third day, a wedding took place at CANA in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them. Oh, missed an important paragraph. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 litres. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you've saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. So, it's a cool story, a well-known story. First thing I want you to notice is that Jesus is at the heart of the party. Jesus is going to a wedding. He's not poo-pooed it. He's not too high and mighty or too religious or too important. He goes to this wedding. He's invited. He goes. He's there for the party. He's there for the feast. And when the wine runs out, he provides more. Wine is very commonly associated with joy in the Bible, with happiness. For obvious reasons, a bit of wine makes you merry. Obviously, if you have a drinking problem or you drink to excess, like we often do in our culture, wine brings sadness and sorrow. That's also reflected in the Bible. But usually, in moderation and in good circumstance, wine brings joy. So wine is associated with joy. Jesus is the bringer of joy in this story. What is it like to know God? He brings us joy. He also saves this groom a lot of shame. And this is where the question comes in. What's Jesus' role here? Because it's the bridegroom's job to provide the wine for a wedding. So Jesus, by stepping in and providing the wine here, is taking up the role of the bridegroom. That's why I asked that question of, wait, whose wedding is this? When Jesus' mother brings it to his attention there's no wine, I think she's implicitly asking him to do something about it. She has an incredible level of faith, Mary. She knows Jesus can fix this somehow. She trusts that he is important, that he is wonderful, that he can fix this. So she says to him, they've run out of wine. Jesus says, "What's it got to do with me?" He says, "Woman," that's not rude in the original language. Don't be offended on Mary's behalf. She's not offended. It's not rude. What's it got to do with me? My hour has not yet come. So he doesn't say, "I'm never going to be the groom," even though we know historically Jesus was never married. If you've heard otherwise, please go look at historical documents and check when they were written and by whom and the attestation outside of them. And there's all sorts of reasons not to believe that. No early document says that. No one believed Jesus was married until centuries after he existed, and there are many sources in the meantime. Jesus was never physically married to an individual, so what's he talking about? He's saying, "I'm not the groom now, but I will be the groom at some point. It's not my job now, but it will be. His hour has not yet come, my hour to be the groom, to provide the wine." And what's he talking about? He's talking about the cross. His own brutal murder death. A cross is a humiliating, shameful, painful, excruciating form of execution and torture. But Jesus talks about it like a marriage, like something important in the fact that he will get married. Well, how does that work? Well, in lots of ways. But in one key way, you notice the water he turned into wine here was water, it was in vessels for purification. On the cross, Jesus cleans us and he is going to purify us, and that turns into a joy, turns into wine. Notice out of Jesus' side when he dies, when he is stabbed, they deal the death blow to him to check he's dead. Water and blood pour out like the water and wine from these jars. That in Jesus' crucifixion, there's purification, sanctification. It makes us holy and clean, just as brides would be washed in those times before they're married. It's a really important part of the bride's preparation to get married. She would be fully ritually washed. So this is ritual washing Jesus offers us turns into this great joy. He turns purification into joy, into wine, new wine. This is also described as a sign. Why is that word important? Because signs point to things. Jesus' miracles, when they're called signs, are not random displays of power or him showing off what he can do, but actually a sign points to something. You don't stop at the sign and think it's the real thing and stop there and, I've reached Berlin. Look, this sign says Berlin on it. I'm here. No, a sign points to a city. It points to something. So what does this sign point to? It points to Jesus' real nature. And that is manifold. It has lots of aspects to it, but one of the aspects is that Jesus is Messiah. Not because he's the bridegroom. So the bridegroom is not really associated with Messiah in the Old Testament very much, if at all, but because he's providing new wine. They knew that in the time of Messiah, in the time of the renewing of Israel, a great wine outpouring would come. In other words, great joy would come to the people of Israel. But here Jesus is showing that with actual literal wine, as a foretaste of what he'll do on the cross with metaphorical wine. He's pouring out this literal wine, immense amounts of wine, in amazing quality of wine. There's several prophecies which refer to this type of thing. There are loads of them actually. Look at Isaiah 25 verse 6 to 8. God promises that on the mountain in Jerusalem he will prepare a feast for all nations. That will include lots of wine. Well, on the mountain in Jerusalem, Jesus did prepare a feast when he died on that cross. Look at the end of Joel 3 from verse 18. A great amount of new wine will be poured out. But look also at Amos. Hopefully I've got it bookmarked. Amos 9 verse 11. And do I have the bookmark? It slipped out, but we can find it. In that day I will restore David's fallen shelter. I will repair its broken walls and restore its ruins and rebuild it as it used to be, so that they may possess the remnant of Eden. And in Edom, sorry, that sounded like Eden, didn't it, when I said it? And all the nations that bear my name, or all those who are called by, all the peoples who are called by my name, declares the Lord, who will do these things. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when the reaper will be overtaken by the plowman, the planter by the one treading the grapes. It's an incredibly abundant harvest. New wine will drip from the mountains and flow from all the hills, and I will bring my people Israel back from exile. So there's this idea that in the time of Messiah, the people of Israel will be brought back from exile, and there'll be an incredible outpouring of new wine. Well, the people of Israel had already come back from exile in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, physical exile, but God had never returned to them. They came to the temple, but the temple was a source of sorrow to those who knew it from before. The old men knew that God had not returned to his temple. It wasn't blessed like it was when the temple was originally built. So this, talking about the tent of David here, is saying that God is going to be with his people, like in the tabernacle. Yahweh dwelt with the people. He lived with the people of Israel, saying at this time of Messiah, when the new wine is poured out, God is going to live with his people again, and all the nations who are called by his name. He's going to invite in all nations. So Jesus, by providing this massive amount of new wine here, this incredible harvest of wine, and pointing forward to the cross and saying that's what he's going to do on the cross, is saying the Messiah has come. The end times are here now. This time of the nations being welcomed in and glorious joy and new wine is here. But this sign also points to another deeper reality, or another reality, I don't know if it's deeper, another reality, which is that Jesus is claiming that he is God. If you've watched my previous video, you'll know that I said that Yahweh, the creator God, the God of Israel in the Old Testament, is the bridegroom. He's the husband of the people of Israel. It's not the Messiah who's supposed to be the husband, it's God himself. So Jesus, by taking up this title, this role of bridegroom, is saying he is God. Now, some groups like Jehovah's Witnesses say, well, he's taking that role, but he's fulfilling that role for God. It's like delegated, like you might delegate a job to someone and you say that that person is really doing it. He's an agent of Yahweh. He's an agent of God, but he's not God. But it's not just a role, is it, being a husband? You can't delegate husbandship to someone else. It's a relationship. Try doing that in the real world, in the flesh, outside of this image. You can't delegate being a husband to someone else. It's deeply relational. Jesus is taking on the relationship of God, or saying that he always has been the husband of Israel. And this promised remarriage of Israel is coming true in him, and that he is going to marry Israel. So I talked about the Old Testament last week, that God describes the Exodus story, him rescuing his people out of Egypt, as a love story of him marrying her and then making a covenant together. A covenant is like a contract, a relational contract together, like a marriage contract. But that Israel broke that contract, he broke that marriage, broke that relationship, broke God's heart and God's home by going after other gods, by being promiscuous, adulterous, by cheating on him. But he promised to renew the relationship. You can look at Hosea 3, talks of a new covenant coming, and the time of Messiah, using the word David to refer to the future Davidic king coming. In the time of Messiah, God's unfailing love will be shown. He will make a new covenant and he will buy his people back. Ezra 16 talks about it, how a new covenant will be made and their shame of Israel will be put away, and Israel's sister nations will also come in. Jeremiah 31 talks about a new covenant being made, atonement being made, the law of God being put on the hearts of the people, and forgiveness coming, but also that they would know God. Just like that tent of David passage from Amos, that knowing God, living with God is core to it. Because in a marriage you know each other and you live with each other. That Old Testament Hebrew word yada for know doesn't just mean, I know him, he's an acquaintance. It means know, it's intimate. And in marriage, knowing someone means having sex, making love, being one flesh, being together. So this promise of God to renew his covenant is a promise of renewed marriage. It's a promise of renewed intimacy. It's a promise of renewed love. And that is there for us in Jesus Christ. Let me explore one prophet in a bit more detail, which is Isaiah, because he charts these things out step by step at one point. Isaiah 40 talks about Israel going to return from exile, and because Yahweh, the creator God, is going to come back to Jerusalem like he promised. Now, Yahweh comes back to Jerusalem, and a voice is going to cry out in the wilderness to make a way for him. That's fulfilled in John the Baptist. These all have parallels in the New Testament. So Isaiah's talking about a new, it's like a new Exodus, but as the return from exile, as a new Exodus. But they've already physically returned from exile, so it's talking about Yahweh returning to them like he did in the Exodus. Yahweh was with them like that tent of David. So all other gods are put on trial. We skip forward to Isaiah 52. Someone's going to come to Jerusalem and declare that God is king. Isaiah 52:53. A messenger, a great servant of God, is going to suffer, make atonement for the people, and God is going to redeem his people back by punishing one and bring healing to his people as well, and atone for their sins, which means cover their sins, forgive them, pay their debts for them. Skip to Isaiah, that was 53. 54, it says, now your maker is going to be your husband again to Israel. That marriage is going to be renewed, that covenant is come again, the promise of a new covenant, a new marriage, a relationship fixed by God's own hand. And then a feast happens in Isaiah 55. This is their wedding feast together. And then in Isaiah 56, the nations are welcomed, and it's not just going to be the people of Israel, but it's going to be all peoples welcome to this wedding feast. So why do I chart that out like that? Because the Gospel of Mark picks up all these themes and shows how Jesus fulfills all of this stuff in his ministry. These all correlate to things Jesus did. So that John the Baptist cries out in the wilderness, make a way for Yahweh to come back to Jerusalem. Except when you look at who he's making a way for, it is Jesus. John the Baptist is saying Jesus is Yahweh returning to Israel, that God is going to live with his people again, like a husband lives with a wife. It's a new Exodus, bringing the people out of their spiritual slavery this time. Then Jesus declares the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Just like in Isaiah 52, one's going to come to Israel and say God is king. Jesus declares God is king. In fact, that he is God the king who's come. Jesus declared the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Then he heals people. He casts out demons. Skip to Mark 2. Jesus starts forgiving people's sins. This is just like in Isaiah 53. The suffering servant will make a way for forgiveness of sins, and all those other prophecies all talk about forgiveness of sins, atonement, when God makes the new covenant. And that's really truly fulfilled on the cross. But Jesus here is commanding the forgiveness of sins. Pharisees are offended. They say only God can forgive sins. Well, of course, Jesus is saying he is God. Then he calls Levi. He eats with tax collectors and sinners. The Pharisees are offended again. He says, no, I'm a doctor. I've come to call the sick. He's calling people to himself like a groom calls people to his wedding. He's inviting you to his wedding. And he has a big banquet with Levi and these guys. He's having this big feast. They criticize him for feasting. And then they criticize him for not fasting. And he says in Mark 2, verse 18 or something like that, verse 19, he responds, how can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and on that day he will fast. And then he talks about getting your clothes ready for a wedding. Then he talks about new wine coming, which is that fulfilling those Old Testament prophecies again of new wine. God will pour out joy in Israel and then to the nations through the Messiah. So Jesus' answers are really important here. Mark is saying Jesus is Yahweh. Mark is saying Jesus is fulfilling what Isaiah promised. He's saying that God will forgive their sins, and he will again live with them, and that he'll make a new covenant promise with them to be with them, and that will be a new marriage. And that all is fulfilled in Jesus. So Jesus is where the party is. Notice Jesus is criticized for having a good time. Jesus is criticized for welcoming all people into this feast. So you are welcome into this feast with Jesus. Everyone is welcome here, no matter what you've done in the past. You come to Jesus. And this wedding feast is an anticipation of what will come. He says there will be a time of fasting. He's not always going to be with them. He will go away. And when the bridegroom's not there, it is time to fast. But while he's on earth, the party is there, getting ready for the big party to come at the end of all things. The big party when Jesus returns, the great wedding feast. Hopefully I'll talk about that in another video, God willing. So, Jesus' hour. We talked about the cross being Jesus' hour. How is that? How is that to do with marriage? Well, because on the cross, Jesus brings the atonement. The atonement means covering, means being at one. Atonement, the word literally is made of at one-ment, being at one. Jesus invites us to join him. And when we are married to Jesus, that means when we believe in Jesus, accept him, we are joined with him. And what Jesus does on the cross is he carries our sins and judgment in his own physical body, and it is nailed to that cross, and it's put to death. So if we're joined to Jesus, we can die. Our sins and judgment and all those things die with him, and our shame dies with him. And as he is resurrected, we are given new life because we're joined to him. Just like a husband and wife are joined, we're called one flesh in the Bible. You're joined together in a new family. You share a name, you share a house, you share your bodies together, and you bring forth new life. It's just the same with Jesus, that when we're joined to him, he brings us everything that he has, and everything that he has is forgiveness of sins because of what he did on the cross. So Jesus is this groom who brings joy wherever he goes. And he is claiming that he is the God of Israel come in person to bring the new covenant, the new marriage, the restoration of the broken relationship which God promised to Israel. But that it also includes all the other nations, just like several of those prophecies said, like Amos 9, Isaiah 56. I think it's in some of the others as well. I can't remember. My brain just lost it there for a second. But that's not the full story. There's way more to come. I'm going to do at least 2 more videos on marriage, God willing. It's a massive topic. It's a really core image of who God is and how he relates to us. It's a real image of love, of oneness, of living together, of loving each other. So God bless you guys. Thanks for coming.